Ladies and gentlemen, there is a peculiar kind of loneliness that visits those who have placed their trust in something greater than themselves. It is not the loneliness of the forsaken, nor the solitude of the lost. It is the quiet space where God removes distractions, pulls you from the familiar, and asks you to listen. We fear isolation because we misunderstand its purpose. We think that if we are set apart, it must mean we are forgotten. But what if isolation is not punishment but preparation? What if the silence is not the absence of God, but the space He makes for something new? When God sets you apart, it is not to abandon you but to prepare you. Isolation can feel like rejection, but in reality, it is often an invitation into something deeper, something unseen but essential. The moments when you feel most removed from the familiar, most disconnected from what once made sense, are often the moments when God is doing His most profound work in your life. Throughout history, those who were called to great purposes experienced seasons of solitude. They were drawn away from the noise of the world, removed from their comfort, and placed in an environment where all they had was God. This is not a coincidence. There is a pattern in how God prepares those He intends to use. He isolates them not to harm them, but to teach them, to strip away distractions, and to rebuild them in ways they never imagined possible. Consider how a potter works with clay. Before the clay can take the form of something beautiful, it must first be separated from the earth. It must be set apart, kneaded, pressed, and shaped by skilled hands. If clay had the ability to feel, the process would seem painful, confusing, and even unnecessary. But the potter sees the final design. He knows what he is creating, and he understands that the pressing and molding are essential. In the same way, when God isolates you, He is molding you. He removes you from what you once clung to, not because He is punishing you, but because those things cannot go where you are headed. There are relationships, habits, mindsets, and environments that have served their purpose, and now, God is calling you to something higher. He isolates you so that you can unlearn what is no longer needed, and be prepared for what is to come. It is in solitude that your foundation is tested. When everything familiar is stripped away, when the voices you once relied on are no longer there, you are left with one question: is God enough? It is in these moments of stillness that you learn to lean on Him in a way you never have before. Your faith is no longer built on convenience or routine, but on something far more unshakable. Isolation also brings clarity. When the noise of the world is removed, you begin to hear in ways you never could before. The distractions that once clouded your vision fade away, and in the quiet, you start to understand what truly matters. It is in these moments that God speaks, not always with an audible voice, but through conviction, revelation, and the gentle guiding of your spirit. Many people resist seasons of isolation because they mistake them for stagnation. They assume that if they are not moving, they must not be growing. But growth often happens in the unseen places. Just as roots grow deep into the soil long before a tree bears fruit, your faith, character, and purpose are developing beneath the surface. What feels like a pause is actually preparation. The discomfort of isolation is often a sign that transformation is taking place. When you are set apart, you may feel restless, uncertain, even frustrated. But these feelings are not indicators that something is wrong. They are signs that something is shifting. It is in the waiting that you learn patience, in the stillness that you develop endurance, and in the quiet that you gain wisdom. This process is not meant to be easy, but it is necessary. If you embrace it rather than resist it, you will begin to see it for what it truly is, not a place of exile, but a place of refinement. Not a sign of God's absence, but a sign of His careful preparation. Silence is often mistaken for absence. When God withdraws the noise, the signs, and the constant affirmations, it can feel as though He is nowhere to be found. The human heart craves reassurance, tangible evidence that God is near, and when that assurance seems to fade, doubt begins to creep in. It is in these moments of quiet that faith is tested, because faith is not built on what is seen or heard, it is built on trust. Throughout life, there are seasons where God seems to step back, where the familiar ways He has spoken no longer seem to reach you. Prayers feel like they are met with nothing but silence, guidance feels distant, and the spiritual warmth you once felt so strongly now seems faint. These seasons can be unsettling because they challenge the idea that God is always evident in ways we can recognize. But His silence does not mean He is absent. In fact, He is often closest when He is the quietest. A teacher does not speak during a test. A gardener does not disturb the seed once it has been planted. There are moments when God is silent because He is allowing what has been placed in you to take root. If He always spoke in the ways we expected, if He always reassured us in the ways we desired, we would never grow beyond needing constant confirmation. But God desires maturity, a faith that stands even when feelings fade, even when there are no signs, even when the world is quiet. Silence forces stillness. It removes the distractions, the constant seeking for external validation, and creates a space where the only thing left to rely on is God Himself. It is in this stillness that you begin to recognize His presence in ways you never noticed before. When the obvious signs are stripped away, you start to see Him in the subtle things, the way He sustains you despite your doubts, the way He provides even when you do not feel Him near. When God is silent, He is often working in ways that cannot yet be seen. There are battles being fought, foundations being strengthened, and doors being prepared. If He were to speak too soon, the lesson would be lost, the dependence on Him would weaken, and the process would be interrupted. Silence is not proof of abandonment, it is proof that something deeper is happening beneath the surface. There is a difference between God's silence and His absence. Absence is the removal of presence, but silence is often an invitation to go deeper. When you can no longer hear Him as you once did, it is not because He is left, but because He is calling you into a different way of knowing Him. This is where faith is refined, not in the moments of loud revelations, but in the quiet endurance of trust. The discomfort of God's silence often reveals how much we have relied on feelings rather than faith. It exposes the tendency to equate His presence with our emotions, His guidance with our expectations. But God does not always move in ways that can be immediately understood. He does not always answer in the way we think He should. Instead, He works according to His wisdom, which often requires patience, stillness, and trust beyond what we can see. The silence is preparation for something greater. God removes the external confirmations so that you can recognize Him in a deeper way. He is teaching you to trust beyond sight, to believe beyond feeling, and to stand firm, even when the evidence is not immediately visible. When you begin to understand this, silence is no longer a punishment or a sign of distance, it becomes a tool, a refining fire, a means of drawing you into a faith that is unshakable. Discomfort is an unavoidable part of growth. It is easy to assume that when things become difficult, something must be wrong, that hardship is a sign of misdirection, or that the pain of transition means you have been abandoned. But discomfort is often the clearest indication that transformation is taking place. Nothing grows without change, and change is rarely comfortable. When God is preparing you for something greater, He will lead you through seasons of discomfort, not as punishment, but as a necessary process of refinement. Growth always requires stretching. A seed buried beneath the soil must break before it can sprout. A caterpillar must struggle within the cocoon before it emerges as something new. Muscles only grow when they are torn and rebuilt. Every process of transformation requires some level of discomfort, because what once was cannot exist in the same form if something new is to take its place. It is the tension between what has been and what is to come, and the space in between is often uncomfortable. The discomfort of isolation, uncertainty, and waiting are all tools in God's hands. He allows these moments not to weaken you, but to strengthen what is within you. When familiar support is stripped away, when prayers seem unanswered, when the next step is unclear, it forces a reliance that goes beyond personal understanding. It is in these moments that faith is purified. Faith that is built only in comfort is shallow, but faith that is tested in hardship becomes unshakable. Discomfort also reveals what needs to be removed. When God is leading you into something greater, there are things that cannot come with you. Old habits, old ways of thinking, certain relationships, or even personal ambitions may need to be stripped away. This process is rarely painless, but it is necessary. The refining fire removes impurities, and while the fire itself is never pleasant, the result is something far stronger and more valuable than before. Waiting is one of the most uncomfortable seasons, yet it is often where the greatest growth happens. When God does not move as quickly as expected, when doors remain closed, and when answers do not come in the anticipated time frame, impatience begins to surface. But delays are not denials. The waiting period is where endurance is developed, where trust is tested, and where dependence on God deepens. It forces a surrender of control, a realization that His timing is perfect, even when it does not align with personal expectations. Challenges and discomfort also serve as preparation. Many people pray for greater purpose, for influence, for impact, yet they resist the process required to carry such responsibility. The weight of what is coming requires strength that can only be built through hardship. Without preparation, promotion becomes dangerous. Without endurance, calling becomes overwhelming. God allows discomfort so that when the time comes, the foundation is strong enough to sustain what He is building. The struggle of transformation often creates doubt. It is tempting to believe that if God was truly present, things would be easier. But Scripture and history show otherwise. Every person who was used mightily faced seasons of challenge. Every great purpose was preceded by great preparation. The wilderness comes before the promised land, the refining comes before the revealing, and the struggle comes before the strength. It is in discomfort that dependence on God deepens. When there is no clear answer, when personal strength is not enough, when comfort is stripped away, the only choice is to trust. This trust is what carries through uncertainty, what sustains in the waiting, and what turns hardship into transformation. The very thing that seems most painful in the moment is often the thing that brings the greatest growth. Separation is often misunderstood. When God removes certain people, opportunities, or environments from your life, it can feel like rejection. It can seem as though you are losing something valuable, being left behind, or being denied what you once thought was necessary. But separation is not rejection, it is often protection. What feels like loss is often a divine redirection, a shield against what would have harmed you, and a preparation for what is ahead. God sees what you cannot. He knows the hearts of people, the hidden dangers in certain paths, and the unseen consequences of choices that seem harmless. When He separates you from something, it is never without reason. Sometimes He removes relationships because they were built on a foundation that could not sustain where you are going. Other times, He pulls you away from places that may have felt comfortable but were limiting your growth. There are moments when what appears to be a setback is actually a rescue. Not everyone can go where God is taking you. There are friendships, connections, and even mindsets that were suitable for a past season, but will not fit the future He is preparing for you. Growth requires change, and change often includes letting go. The struggle comes when familiarity fights against transformation. It is difficult to release what feels safe, even when it is no longer beneficial. But holding on to something that God is trying to remove only delays what He is trying to bring. Separation is not always immediate. Sometimes God allows things to fade gradually. A once close friendship may begin to feel distant, an opportunity that once seemed promising may no longer bring fulfillment, or a passion that once fueled you may begin to dwindle. These shifts are often gentle warnings that a transition is taking place. Resisting them can lead to frustration, but embracing them allows for a smoother transition into what is next. Protection does not always feel like protection. When something is taken away, it can feel like a loss rather than a safeguard. But hindsight often reveals the purpose behind the separation. There are moments when God removes something only for you to later realize it was never meant to remain. He spares you from attachments that would have led to heartbreak, distractions that would have derailed your purpose, and connections that would have drained your strength. Separation can also be a test of obedience. There are times when you must choose to walk away from something before understanding why. Trusting God means following His lead, even when the reasoning is unclear. This requires faith, believing that if He is removing something, it is for your good, even if it does not feel that way in the moment. When He calls you away from something, He is always leading you towards something better. Isolation is not the same as abandonment. There will be times when God sets you apart, not to leave you alone, but to refocus your heart. He may remove you from a group, a relationship, or a familiar place to draw you closer to Him. In solitude, distractions are silenced, dependence is strengthened, and clarity is gained. What feels like separation from others is often an invitation to deeper communion with God. Understanding separation as protection changes how it is experienced. Instead of resisting it, there is a surrender, a trust that what is being removed is for a reason. It allows for gratitude rather than resentment, peace rather than confusion, and faith rather than fear. When viewed through this lens, what once seemed like rejection becomes a reminder of God's care, His wisdom, and His desire to lead you towards something far greater than what you would have chosen for yourself. Trusting the process is one of the hardest things to do, especially when life seems uncertain, prayers feel unanswered, and progress appears slow. It is natural to want immediate clarity, to desire visible proof that everything is working out as it should. But God's timing and methods are not always easy to understand. He often works in ways that are unseen, in places that feel hidden, and through processes that do not make sense in the moment. Trusting the process means believing that even when you do not see movement, something is happening beneath the surface. God does not rush development. Just as a seed takes time to grow, so does everything that He is building in you. A tree does not bear fruit overnight, and the deeper its roots grow, the stronger it becomes. If a tree were forced to grow too quickly, it would not be able to withstand storms. In the same way, God is strengthening your foundation before He brings the increase. The waiting, the struggles, and the challenges are all part of ensuring that what He builds in you will last. There is often a gap between promise and fulfillment. Many people throughout history have received a calling, a vision, or a purpose, but before they stepped into it, they endured a process of refinement. This process is never easy because it often includes waiting, testing, and moments of discomfort. It is in this in-between space that trust is truly developed. It is easy to have faith when things happen quickly, but real faith is built in the moments when nothing seems to be happening at all. The process also reveals what is in the heart. It exposes fears, impatience, and areas that still need growth. Many people pray for a great calling, but the weight of that calling requires a character that has been shaped by endurance. Without the process, the blessing could become a burden. If someone were handed success without preparation, they would not be able to sustain it. God allows challenges not to break a person, but to build them into someone who can carry the responsibility of what is coming. Delays are often part of God's design. What seems like stagnation is often divine timing at work. If something happens too soon, it may not be as impactful as it could be at the right moment. The right thing at the wrong time can be damaging. Many times what feels like waiting is actually preparation, not just for the opportunity itself, but for the ability to handle it with wisdom and grace when it arrives. Obedience plays a role in trusting the process. It is not always about understanding every detail, but following where God leads, even when the path is unclear. Some steps may feel small or insignificant, but they are building towards something greater. There are times when instructions will not make sense, when the next step seems unnecessary, but faith is walking forward even without full comprehension. There will be moments of doubt, times when discouragement creeps in, and questions that remain unanswered. But trusting the process means believing that God is not wasting anything. Every difficulty, every delay, and every disappointment serves a purpose in the bigger picture. The lessons learned in struggle prepare for seasons of blessing. The challenges endured in silence become the wisdom that sustains success. The process is not meant to be easy, but it is necessary. If something is built too quickly, it does not have the strength to last. The foundation must be deep before the structure can rise. Every unseen moment, every hardship, every seemingly small act of faith is adding to something greater. Trusting the process is choosing to believe that even when nothing seems to be changing, God is still at work, shaping, refining, and preparing for what is to come. Clarity rarely comes in the moment of uncertainty. When you are in the middle of a difficult season, when answers seem distant and purpose feels unclear, it is hard to understand why things are happening the way they are. Confusion can set in, and doubt can whisper that maybe everything is falling apart instead of coming together. But God does not work according to human timelines, and He does not always reveal the purpose of a season while you are still walking through it. Often, clarity only comes when you look back and realize how everything was aligning in ways you could not have seen at the time. Life is full of moments that only make sense in hindsight. What once seemed like a delay turns out to have been divine protection. What once felt like a closed door was actually a redirection to something better. The relationships that ended, the opportunities that did not work out, and the plans that were disrupted all played a role in shaping what was meant to be. It is human nature to want to understand everything immediately, but some lessons, some growth, and some purposes can only be understood after time has passed. God allows seasons of uncertainty for a reason. If everything were clear from the beginning, there would be no need for faith. If the full picture were given in advance, there would be no room for trust. It is in the waiting, in the unknown, that faith is strengthened. It is in the moments of confusion that dependence on God deepens. Clarity does not always come instantly because there are things that need to be built within before they can be fully revealed. Unanswered prayers are actually a sign of God's care. What is wanted in the moment may not be what is needed in the long run. There are times when God says no, not because He is withholding something good, but because He is protecting from something unseen. If every desire were granted immediately, without wisdom or preparation, it could lead to places that were never meant to be. Looking back, Many people realize that what once felt like disappointment was actually a blessing in disguise. Perspective changes everything. When standing too close to a painting, all that can be seen are individual strokes and colors that do not seem to form a coherent picture. But when stepping back, the full image comes into view. Life works the same way. When caught in the details of a difficult season, it may feel disjointed, frustrating, and confusing. But as time passes, the broader picture starts to emerge, revealing how each moment, each challenge, and each unexpected turn was part of a larger plan. Growth often happens in the hidden places. Seeds do not sprout the moment they are planted. There is a process happening underground, unseen but necessary. In the same way, the work that God is doing is not always immediately visible. Just because there are no outward signs of progress does not mean transformation is not taking place. The lessons being learned in the quiet, the endurance being built in the waiting, and the wisdom being developed in hardship are all preparing for what is to come. There will be a time when everything begins to make sense. The struggles endured will connect with the victories ahead. The questions that once seemed unanswerable will find their resolution. The confusion will fade, and what once seemed uncertain will become clear. Every season, even the painful one, serves a purpose in shaping the journey. Nothing is wasted. The moments that feel the most unclear are often the ones that later reveal the greatest lessons. Clarity will come, and when it does, it will be evident that every step was leading exactly where it was meant to go.